Hola estudiantes! Today we're going to talk about the subjunctive, focusing mainly on the W and the R in weird. Please have your note guide out and ready. So let's do a quick review of regular subjunctive verbs, los verbos regulares en el subjuntivo. So we know when we're dealing with regular verbs, the first thing that you do is you put the verb in the yo form, present tense, then you take off the O and you add the opposite endings. So for example, if I was doing trabajar, it would be trabajé, comer, coma, and vivir, viva. So here are all of the subjunctive regular endings. So you could say something like, I want that you work with me. Quiero que trabajes conmigo. Or I wish that you would eat lunch. Espero que comas almuerzo. So what I want you to do now is you can either use your subjunctive handout that I gave you, or you can just listen. And I also want you to fill out the note guide, 1 through 4 on the note guide while I talk about these subjunctive verbs. We're writing the verb and the subjunctive. The first part of the sentence, the first, like quiero, deseo, desean, or quieran, those verbs are in the present tense and they ultimately trigger the subjunctive in the second part of the sentence. So if I wanted to say, I want that my boyfriend works in the garden, I would say, quiero que mi novio trabaje en el jardín. If I wanted to say, I wish that my friends play cards with me, I would say, deseo que mis amigos jueguen a las cartas conmigo. That's an irregular one. Look on your verb sheet that I gave you if you have trouble spelling that. If I wanted to say, my friends wish that I snorkel with them, I would say, mis amigos desean que yo bucee con ellos. If I wanted to say, our professors want that we sleep more, I would say, nuestros profesores quieren que nosotros dormamos más horas. Also look on your verb sheet because dormir is a funny one. So, like I said, we're focusing on the W and the R in weird. We know that weird stands for wishes, emotions, and personal remarks, requests, and doubt. So, the verbs that trigger the subjunctive are in the first part of the sentence before que, and they're in the present tense. Some of the verbs that we're going to focus on today are verbs like querer, to want, or insistir, to insist, or desear, to wish for. Right now, I want you to answer number 5 on your note guide. What are 2 verbs that trigger the subjunctive? Remember, these verbs are in the present tense. So, just like I said, a verb that triggers or activates the subjunctive is in the first part of the sentence. Right now, while I'm doing this, I want you to do 1 through 3 with me that correlate with the slide. So in Spanish, if I wanted to say, I want that my boyfriend works in the garden, quiero would trigger the subjunctive. Quiero would be in the present tense, ultimately triggering trabajé in the second part. If I wanted to say, I wish that my friends play, the same thing. Deseo y jueguen. Deseo, present tense. Juegan, subjunctive. And the same thing, insistir, it's expressing a wish or a request, and it would trigger the subjunctive in the second part of the sentence. So this is when I say weird, that's what I'm talking about. These expressions are expressing the W in the R in weird, wishes and requests. So here are some other verbs that would trigger the subjunctive in the second part of the sentence. They activate it. So these verbs would all be in the present tense, and most of the time they'd be in the first part of the sentence. So please write down the meaning of these verbs in English. If you miss it or you don't catch what I say, you can always go back and use wordreference.com. So write down the English definition of these words, and these are in the present tense. So querer que, to want that. Pedir que, to ask that. Insistir en que, to insist. Proponer que, to propose. Es necesario que, it's necessary that. Recomendar que, to recommend that. Prohibir que, to prohibit. Rogar, to beg. Preferir, to prefer. Es probable que, it's possible that. Desear que, to wish that. Exigir que, to demand that. Sugerir, to suggest that. Aconsejar, to advise that. So all of these verbs would trigger the subjunctive in the second part of the sentence. We would use these verbs in the present tense. So I could say something like, I want that you do well on the test. Quiero que hagas bien en este examen. Or I recommend that you study more. Yo recomiendo que tú estudies más. Or it's necessary that you pay attention in class. Es necesario que pegues atención en la clase. Right now, I want you to fill out part 1 on your note guide where it says write a sentence using one of the subjunctive trigger verbs from above. So let's talk a little bit about the components of the subjunctive sentences and what makes a sentence be in the subjunctive and what a sentence could be in the indicative. So first, you have to identify the expression that activates the subjunctive. So in this situation, it would be propongo. Then you have to identify the subjects. Remember, there has to be a change of subject for the subjunctive to occur. So I say, I propose that we do jogging. So I propose, and then there's a change of subject, we, that would trigger the subjunctive. Then identify the verbs. Does it trigger the subjunctive or does it trigger the indicative? We'll talk more about this right now. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the indicative and the subjunctive. So this is a little bit more complicated because now we're using the subjunctive and the indicative together. When I say indicative, the indicative just means the present tense. If I'm not following one of those components, if I don't have a verb that triggers the subjunctive and there's not a change of subject, then I would use the indicative or the present tense. So I wouldn't put the verb in the subjunctive. I would put the verb in the present tense. So all of these verbs right here are in the subjunctive, but we'll mix them up on the next slide. So right now we're just focusing on the subjunctive. So I could say, we want that our friends comment on the blog. Queremos would be a verb that would trigger the subjunctive, and comenten would be the verb in the subjunctive. If I wanted to say, it's possible that my mom knits well, I would say, es posible que mi madre teja bien. Es posible que triggers the subjunctive. It's focusing on the I in weird and personal remark, and it triggers the subjunctive in the second part of the sentence since there's a change of subject, madre, so I would use the subjunctive teja. If I wanted, this verb is in the subjunctive, I insist that my parents do the work in my house, so insisto would be in the present tense, ultimately triggering the subjunctive hagan in the second part of the sentence. And here is probable que los estudiantes lean libros de espías. It's probable that the students read books about spies. So is probable que triggers the subjunctive in the second part of the sentence. So just a quick review again. The conditions to use the subjunctive: there has to be an expression that activates the subjunctive, and it has to be part of weird, wishes, emotions, and personal remarks, requests, or doubt. Right now we're focusing on W and R of weird. There has to be a different subject or a change of subject. So you could say, like, I want that you do well, or I want that you listen. And so let's talk about some of these sentences. Necesito que hagan más ejercicio. I need that you do more exercise. So I have necesito, it triggers the subjunctive, and there's a change of subject. But here, there's no change of subject. On this sentence, I wish to do jogging in the beach. Deseo hacer jogging en la playa. There's no change of subject, so I just use the indicative, which would be the present tense, or the infinitive. And then the next one, mis padres quieren que lea cuentos cortos. My parents want that we read short stories. There's a change of subject. There's a verb that triggers the subjunctive. We use the subjunctive. So right now I want you to think, would it be the infinitive or the subjunctive? So the infinitive, remember, is a verb that ends with ER, AR, or IR. So in this one sentence, it says, I insist that the students play many video games. There's a trigger, insisto, in the subjunctive, and there's a change of subject, so we'll use the subjunctive, jueguen. This one says, I prefer to decorate the house like I like. There is a trigger for the subjunctive, but there's no change of subject, so we just keep it in the infinitive, decorar. Here at number 3, we say, I advise all the students that we go camping in the summer. Les aconsejo is a subjunctive trigger, so I use this, and there's a change of subject, so I use the subjunctive vayan. And here, there's a subjunctive trigger. It's preferable that we do arts and crafts with an expert. However, there's no change of subject, so we just keep it in the infinitive, hacer. Here's some more. Patricia asked that her brother play chess with her. So there's a change of subject, and we have a verb in the subjunctive, so we would use the subjunctive, juegue. And the professor wants that the students learn the subjunctive. So this verb would be in the present tense, quiere, because it's at the very beginning and the subjunctive is at the end. It's necessary that we eat well in order to go jogging. So it's necessary that We eat, so we would use the subjunctive because es necesario que is a trigger for the subjunctive, and there's a change of subject, so we would use the subjunctive. And right here where it says, I recommend that you go to Mexico in order to learn arts and crafts, I recommend that you go, so we would use the subjunctive, vayas. And then here this says the students wish to study in the library. Well, desear is a trigger for the subjunctive, but there's no change of subject, so we would just use the infinitive. So, I know I just went over a lot. We'll spend more time in class reviewing the subjunctive and then also with the indicative and the infinitive. So, I hope that you understand the concept, and we'll spend more time in class. Be ready for the flip mini quiz the next time that we come. Adios.